Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Berurah shiur. We are holding in Berurah Chelik Hey. We're going to be learning today Miras Hashem Daf Kuf Chav Tes Amud Aleph. We're continuing to learn Hilchas Yom Tov. We pick up today on the bottom line of Kuf Chav Ches Amud Beis, Siman Tov Kuf Yud Aleph Sif Daled. Says the Mechaber, Ein Oisin Mugmar. You are not allowed to prepare Mugmar. What's Mugmar? You're not allowed to take different types of besamim, different types of fragrant incense, spices, and sprinkle it down on top of burning coals so that it should smoke, it should burn, and it should give off a nice smell. And you're not allowed to do this bein lahariach, whether you're doing this in order to enjoy the fragrant aroma, uvein legamer habayis oy hakelim, or if what you're trying to do is you're trying to infuse the house with a pleasant smell, or to infuse kalim. Let's say you have begadim, you have clothing that you want to infuse with a nice smell. I know sometimes I have a charcoal smoker out in the backyard, and I enjoy smoking meat. And but when you smoke meat, you get a very strong smell. At the same time, my wife sometimes puts the laundry out on the back deck in order to dry. And I have to warn her, if I'm going to be smoking something, you got to take the laundry inside. Otherwise, all of that laundry smells like smoked brisket, which some of you might enjoy, but not everybody likes this. They don't want to smell like a smoked brisket. So you're not allowed to burn this incense on Yom Tov, whether you're doing it to just enjoy the aroma, or whether you're trying to infuse the house with a pleasant smell, or you're trying to infuse kalim of some type with a pleasant smell. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it begins on the bottom line of Kuf Chav Ches Amud Beis. Mishnah Berurah is Kaf Chav Aleph. Mugmar. You are not allowed to burn this mugmar. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Tehu davar she'enoi shaveh l'chol nefesh, because the burning of the mugmar, it involves malacha. And we're going to see specifically there are really two malacha problems when you try to burn incense. So what do you have here? You have, let's say, a keli that has burning coals in it. Now you take the incense, whether it's spices or chips of some kind, and you sprinkle it down onto the coals. Two things are going to happen. One thing that's going to happen is initially when the mugmar goes on top of the coals, it's going to dim the coals somewhat. So you're going to have a malacha of kivui. You're going to somewhat extinguish the coals. That's one problem, the malacha of kivui. Then you're going to have another problem, and that is that the mugmar that you sprinkled on top of the burning coals is going to ignite. So now you have the malacha of havara. So you have two malachas over here. You have kivui and you have havara. Now, this that you're doing, even if we're going to say, according to those shittas, that any type of hanas haguf is considered oichel nefesh, but this is not a davar hashaveh l'chol nefesh. This is not something that everybody appreciates. This is not something that everybody sees as a requirement, that they have to have mugmar. So even though there are mifunakim, there are feinschmeckers that enjoy it, but this is not a davar hashaveh l'chol nefesh. And as we've learned already many times, something that's not a davar hashaveh l'chol nefesh, you cannot be matir malacha on Yom Tov. So that's why the Chavetz Chaim says here, why is this aser? Dehu davar she'eino shaveh l'chol nefesh, elo lemi'unagim. This is only something that's appreciated by those people who are mu'unag, those people who look to have a lot of oneg, a lot of pleasure seekers. V'lo hutar b'Yom Tov, and therefore it's not mutar on Yom Tov. Ule'inyan shtias titun b'Yom Tov. Now, shtias titun, titun apparently is tabak, is tobacco. Shtias literally means drinking. I have a funny feeling that what the Chavetz Chaim means over here by shtias titun, he means the inhaling. We're talking about mugmar, we're talking about reach. So he's talking about the inhaling of tobacco, which we know is done in many different ways. You could do it through a pipe. You could do it through a cigarette, through a cigar. You could also burn the tobacco in some kind of an open dish and inhale the smoke that way. But I think this is what he means by shtias titun, is he's referring to the inhaling of tobacco smoke. And we'll take a look at that Biur Halacha, and we'll see what the Biur Halacha has to say about smoking on Yom Tov and what the contemporary poskim have to say about smoking, both smoking in general and smoking on Yom Tov specifically. Now, before we get to that, the Mechaber said you cannot make this mugmar, you can't prepare the mugmar, you can't burn the mugmar on coals. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cotton Febreeze, al hagecholim. You're not allowed to burn this incense, these fragrant spices on coals. Says the Chavetz Chaim, begacholim shel eitz. We're talking about wooden coals over here, and that's specific. But let's read the rest of the Mishnah Berurah. Even if this burning that you're doing is somehow going to be considered oichel nefesh, you're still not allowed to do it. You have, I'm sorry, let me go back. You're not allowed to burn the mugmar on the coals, even if you lit these coals, so let's go back again to the preparing of the smoked brisket. Let's say you went up and you fired up a grill full of coal in order to go smoke your brisket. So you were allowed to do that. You were doing it mamish l'tzarech eichel nefesh. You're making a brisket for Yom Tov. Now that you have burning hot coals, you want to sprinkle mugmar on top of the coals. That's what the Chavetz Chaim is telling you. You're not allowed to put the mugmar on top of wooden coals, even if you ignited those wooden coals beheter. You did it mamish l'tzarech eichel nefesh. Why is that? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. T'yesh bazeh mishum mechabe. Because like I told you earlier, besides the problem of havara, of making the fire, so it's very nice. You avoided the problem of havara because you ignited these coals l'tzarech eichel nefesh to make your brisket. So you ignited these coals beheter. So there's no havara problem. But you have another problem. You have the problem of kibui. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, hagecholim betchilas nesinasan. When you first sprinkle the mugmar on top of the coals, you're going to dim and somewhat extinguish the coals. So you have a kivui problem. Umavir, and then you have another havara problem. So yes, you avoided the havara problem of the coals, but you have another havara problem. Umavir shemaver habesamim. The mugmar itself, the spices themselves, are going to ignite after you put them on the burning coals. So you have two problems over here. You have havara and you have kivui. They're not mutter because this is not a davar hashavah l'chol nefesh. And even if you initially lit the coals l'tzarech l'chol nefesh, you didn't avoid the havara of the besamim and the mugmar and the kivui of the gecholim. The chol shekenim hiver hagecholim b'shvil zeh. And certainly, if you wanted to light coals initially for the purpose of burning incense, that 100% is also aser. Then your initial havara is also not mutter. It's not tzarech eichel nefesh, that's davar hashavah l'chol nefesh. So that would certainly not be mutter. And the Chavetz Chaim concludes, and he says, Va'af begacheles shel cheres. This also would be aser if you were using an earthenware gacheles. What's an earthenware gacheles? Pirish explains the Chavetz Chaim, cheres, a piece of earthenware, shenisak, which was fired up. You took a piece of earthenware and you put it in a fire and you got it burning hot, and now you want to use it litzleis alav basar. Now you want to roast a piece of meat on top of it. That piece of earthenware retains its heat after you fired it up, and now you want to use it to roast meat. So now you have a burning hot piece of cheres. Now you want to sprinkle mugmar on it. Is that mutter? It says, no, that's also aser. Mashba b'shasta aser. The Gemara implies that this would also be aser. And one of the problems over here with a gacheles of cheres is that we're going to see later there's an isser of infusing a keli with a pleasant smell. Now, when you take the mugmar and you sprinkle it onto the gacheles, so let's analyze what's happening. You have the gacheles. When you initially fired up the gacheles, you were doing it l'tzarech eichel nefesh. You were doing it to roast a steak on it. So the initial firing up of the cheres was okay. Now you take the mugmar and you sprinkle the mugmar onto the cheres. There is no kibui, because we say that by cheres, there's no kibui. Cheres is like metal. There's no fire that you're putting out. We don't view that as kibui. you still could have the potential problem of the havara of the mugmar, if the mugmar is going to catch fire and burn. So you have that problem, but you also have another problem, and that is that by doing this, you're going to infuse the piece of cheres with the fragrant aroma of the mugmar. And we're going to see that that's also something which is asur on Yom Tov. Okay. Ois Katan Chav Gimel. The Mechaber said that you're not allowed to burn the mugmar, whether you're doing it because you want to smell the pleasant aroma of the mugmar, or you're doing it like gamer habayis, or you're doing it as an air freshener. You want to infuse the house with a pleasant aroma. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Dafka Kisha Oise Zeh B'Yom Tov. This is only asur if you're actually burning the mugmar to put the pleasant aroma into the house on Yom Tov. Aval, however, motor likach me erev Yom Tov kli shel barzel mole nekavim. What you're allowed to do is, I think this is called a censer. Is that what it's called? You're allowed to take a metal keli. You have a metal keli that has a cover on it that has holes in it. It's perforated. So what you do is you take the mugmar, you put it into this keli, and now you make a fire inside this keli, and you make the fragrant smoke of the mugmar inside the keli, and you close up all of the holes so that the smoke, the pleasant smelling smoke, is trapped inside the keli. And then when Yom Tov begins tomorrow, now you open up the holes, and now the pleasant aroma that was trapped inside this keli escapes, and now the house becomes infused with a pleasant smell. V'shari lasais kein afilu b'Shabbos. The Chavetz Chaim brings down for the Gemara in Be'ah and Chav Beis Amud Beis that this is mutter to do even on Shabbos. There is no malacha involved over here. You're not doing the burning on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. The burning was done on Erev Shabbos or on Erev Yom Tov. All you're doing is opening up the keli and letting the fragrance escape. Over there, there's no isser. Okay, let's go a little bit weiter before we tackle that biur halacha about smoking. Continues the Mechaber, we invite the top line of Kuf Chav Tes Amud Aleph. Avol, however, im oise kein kidei litain, im oise kidei litain reach toiv beperos. Let's say the reason you want to burn incense is not because you want to smell the incense. It's not because you want to infuse clothing with a pleasant smell. It's not because you want to infuse the house with a pleasant smell. You're doing it because you have peros, you have fruits that somehow benefit from the pleasant aroma of the mugmar. It somehow sweetens up the fruit. I don't know, I'm not familiar with such a metzias. I'm not familiar with such a process of sweetening fruit using smoke, but apparently there was such a process. So if you're doing it in order to improve the taste of the fruit, you're doing it to sweeten the fruit, then lamaskan la'achila, you're doing this to sweeten the fruit for achila, mutter, then it's permissible. Afilu im mefazron egachas shel eitz. Even if you're going to sprinkle the mugmar onto wooden coals. So you have all of these problems that we spoke about before. You have kibui of the coals. You're going to sprinkle the mugmar on the coals, and you're going to somewhat extinguish the coals. You're going to have the havara of the mugmar, but since you're doing it in order to sweeten the peros, that's considered oichel nefesh. So now it's considered a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. That's something that everybody could appreciate. Everybody appreciates a nice, delicious, sweetened fruit. So you had fruits, and now you're improving the fruits. That's tzarech oichel nefesh with the davar hashava l'chol nefesh. So therefore, the kivui and the havara are mutter on Yom Tov. Says the Chavetz Chaim. A nice cotton chav dalad. If you're doing this in order to sweeten the fruits for eating purposes, says the Chavetz Chaim, va'afilu toivim kach. Even if you have fruits that are completely edible the way they are, and indeed they taste good the way they are, but by the process of this smoking, you're improving it. You want to sweeten up the fruits even more. Shari, that's mutter. This is mutter even if you're sprinkling the mugmar onto wooden coals. Even though you're going to have the malacha of kivui because of the dimming of the coals, and you're going to have the malacha of havara but you're igniting the mugmar, and maybe even you ignited the fire for the coals for this purpose. Shari, it's mutter. Why? The davar zeh shava l'chol nefeshu, because the Chavetz Chaim says this is considered a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. So this is tzarech nefesh, and it's a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. Everybody appreciates it, and therefore the malacha is mutter on Yom Tov. Says the Chavetz Chaim weiter. The af aniyim, he says, even poor people, misaven lamasek achilasan, even poor people who can't afford to somehow do this kind of process, even they appreciate, certainly, sweet ability to do it. So you're not going to say that it's not a davar hashava l'chol nefesh because aniyim don't have fruits. You'll tell me what? You want to make havara and kibo in order to sweeten fruits? It's not a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. You have lower class people who don't have the financial resources and they don't have fruits for Yom Tov. No, it doesn't matter. They still want it. They would love to have it and they would appreciate it. Just they can't afford it. Even though we did say earlier, we said that there was a process by which they would sweeten up mustard seed. They would have the mustard seed and they would take a burning coal and shtup it into the mustard seed and extinguish it in the mustard seed, and some of that would sweeten the mustard seed. And we said you're not allowed to do that on Yom Tov. Now, why isn't that similar to this? What's the problem over there? You're doing kibui on the kachela shel eitz in order to sweeten up the chardal, to sweeten the mustard. So over here, I'm doing kibui on the kachela shel eitz in order to sweeten the fruit. So how come this is mutter and that's aser? Explains the Chavetz Chaim over here. Hasam, the reason why it's aser by the chardal is mishum de efsher miba'od yom shekain darkoi. Now this is very interesting because we already had 3 different places where the Berurah mentions this iser of sweetening up the mustard. And in different places, we've seen different reasons. We saw previously that the mustard is aser because the Berurah said it's not a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. Most people will have the mustard and enjoy the mustard without this added step of extinguishing a coal in it. And therefore, even though it's tzarech ochel nefesh, let's not forget, it's something that you're doing to the meichel itself. So it doesn't seem to be machshirei ochel nefesh, it's ochel nefesh. And by ochel nefesh, we don't differentiate between efshar la'asoisai miba'od yom and efshar la'asoisai miba'od yom. So we saw previously that the reason it's aser is because most people skip that step in mustard production. So it's not a davar hashava l'chol nefesh, and that's why it's aser. Over here, and in one other place, the Mishnah Berurah says, the reason it's aser is because it's efshar miba'od yom. Now, why does that make it aser? It's meichel nefesh. It's tzarech ochel nefesh. So you could say that the Mishnah Berurah is saying this according to the sheet of the Ramah. The sheet of the Ramah, and we saw that we don't paskin that way, the Ramah brought down the shita that even by ochel nefesh itself, if it's something that's efshar la'asoisai miba'od yom with absolutely no cost to Yom Tov, you should do it miba'od yom and it's aser on Yom Tov. So you could take the position that the Mishnah Berurah is talking over here in the shita of the Ramah. But the problem with saying that is because if you look at the Sharet Tzion, Ois Cotton Lamed Daled, the Mishnah Berurah is bringing this down in the name of the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef is the Mechaber. So he's bringing this down from the Mechaber. It's the sheet of the Mechaber. According to the Mechaber, tzarech ochel nefesh, even if it's efshar la'asoisai miba'od yom, it's still mutter. So I think what you have to say is, I think the key words of the Mishnah Berurah over here are Hasam mishum de efshar miba'od yom shekain dark. The way it was done, you didn't do this normally. You didn't extinguish the coal in the mustard seed immediately before you made mustard for your pastrami. That's not the way it was done. It was always done in advance. So if you have a malacha that's always done in advance, why are you doing it on Yom Tov? It's not only efshar la'asoisai miba'od yom. It's not just a malacha that could have been done miba'od yom. It's a malacha that's always done miba'od yom. It's always done in advance. So then it should have been done in advance. Okay. There's another problem with this, which is that the burning, the process of manufacturing mustard is something that was always done liyamim harbe. Like I spoke out then, you didn't make mustard, you didn't produce mustard for your pastrami sandwich for lunch. You produced mustard and you had mustard in storage for 3 months. So when you produced mustard, you always did it liyamim harbe. So to go ahead and do this process on Yom Tov itself, that's an additional problem. It looks like you're doing an uvda d'chayil. It looks like you're doing something which is usually done liyamim harbe. Okay, now let's get back on track. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. Vedan, you should know the Yeshmina Paiskim. There are those Paiskim, and in the Sharetzian he brings this down from the Ramban, the Ran, the Magen Avraham. The Vedad, the Yeshmina Paiskim. There are those Paiskim shesoivrin who hold the dafka im hagecholim huvaru mikvar letzarich oichel nefesh liktera ukahaygavna. That this that you're allowed to burn the mugmar in order to sweeten the fruit, that's only if the burning of the coals was done for a different tzarech oichel nefesh beheter. If you lit up coals in order to roast a steak, or you made a fire in order to put a pot over the fire in order to cook up a soup, now you want to go ahead and you want to put the mugmar onto the fire in order to go sweeten fruits, then it's mutter. Aval also lahaver eitzim lechatchila kedei lefazer mine b'samim tachas haperos al gabe gachalton. But to make the initial fire, initial fire of the eitzim or of the gecholim, in order to sprinkle the besamim on it, in order to sweeten the fruits, then these poskim are not willing to be matir. Now, what's the reason for that? Why wouldn't they be matir that? So I know one thing I saw, and something just struck me. I just want to check something over here. Something just struck me. But one reason I know is because what are the 3 problems that we have here again? The first problem is the initial fire, the initial firing up of the coals. That's havara. So what these poskim are saying is they don't want to be matir havara mamish for the tzorich of mugmar lamate kaperis. Yes, they're willing to consider that on some level on oichel nefesh, that's a davar hashava l'chol nefesh, but it's a little bit specious. Is it really tzarich? Is it really davar hashava l'chol nefesh? So the initial havara of burning the coals, these poskim don't want to be matir if it's only lamate kaperis. But they say if you made an initial fire, you fired up coals in order to roast a steak, you fired up coals, you made a fire to put a pot on top of, so that was 100% mutter, l'tzarich oichel nefesh mamish, that's 100% the davar hashava l'chol nefesh. Now you want to sprinkle mugmar on it, lamate kaperos, now you can. Okay, what 2 problems are we left with? One is the kibui. When you sprinkle the mugmar on the coals, you're going to somewhat extinguish the coals. These poskim hold that that's not such a big deal to be matir, because that's not kibui mamish. That's not really extinguishing. Because what's going to happen? Yes, when you put the mugmar onto the coals, you're going to cover up the coals, you're going to deprive them from oxygen for a certain amount. It's going to dim the coals a little bit. But then what happens? They very quickly regain their strength. So it's not really kibui mamish. So it's a relatively easy type of kibui to be matir. And you are doing it lamate kaperos. So okay, they're matir that. What I'm left with is the havara of the mugmar itself. Why are they willing to be matir that? So one second. Why are they willing to be matir that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure why they're not worried about the havara of the mugmar itself. The Chavetz Chaim said that is a problem. You're burning the mugmar. So if they're not willing to be matir havara for mugmar lamate kaperos with the initial fire, why are they willing to be matir it for the havara on the mugma? I'm not sure that I have to research. Open question. Okay. Let's go weiter. Now let's go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah, Hagah, and this is an isser that a lot of people are not aware of. Sorry, I'm just slightly distracted here. Give me 1 second. Thought I had an answer to that question, and now it's not. Okay. All right. Says the Ramah, Hagah. Va'aser lischayf kais mevusam al habegodim. You're not allowed to pass some kind of a kais, some kind of a keli that has fragrance in it, al habegodim, over clothing, mishum demoilid bahen reicha, because by doing this you're going to infuse a pleasant smell into the begodim. So the contemporary case of this that I would think of is fabric Febreeze. You have Febreeze. There's different types of Febreeze. There's Febreeze that's used just as an air freshener, but there's also a Febreeze that's made specially for fabrics, and somehow it has the ability to bind to the fabrics and get into the fibers of the fabrics and infuse the fabric with a pleasant smell. So let's say it's Simchas Torah, and somebody was dancing the whole night. Oy, Rabbi said we should be able to have a normal dancing by Simchas Torah with what's going on with this COVID. We should be able to all be in shul in a crowd with no social distancing and holding hands and no masks. Not that we shouldn't be careful. Chas v'chalila, we should be careful. But what I'm saying is halavai, that it should come very quickly that we shouldn't need any of this anymore. But anyway, somebody was dancing, he danced up a storm, and his suit might not smell 100% the best the next morning. And somehow he realizes that his second suit is in the cleaners. So you want to take some Febreeze and you want to spray your suit with some Febreeze to make it smell pleasant. Guess what? The Ramah says you're not allowed to do that. Why? Because you're infusing it with a pleasant odor. What's wrong with that? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aiskatan Chavav, Va'asur al habegodim. Va'afilu beged shemeriach kvar, even if you have a beged that already has an aroma to it, it already has maybe a pleasant smell to it, ein litein alav kedei she'ariach yoiser. You're not allowed to add more Febreeze to make it smell even nicer. Nevertheless, esrig shahayamunach me'erev Yom Tov ala beged. Let's say you had an esrig on Sukkot that was sitting on a towel, and it made the towel smell nice. Unetaloi mimenu, and now you took the esrig to take it to davening. Now after davening, you want to put it back on the towel. Are you allowed to do that, or do you have to worry that the pleasant smell of the esrig is going to be infused into the towel? Says the Chavetz Chaim, mutar lahachzira. You're allowed to replace the esrig on the towel. De'enei meriach yoser b'shvil kach. Because he says once the towel already has the fragrance of the esrig, by putting it back, it's not going to increase the fragrance of the esrig, of the towel. Whatever smell, whatever reach tov the towel absorbed, it already absorbed. You're not going to add more to it by putting the esrig back. Now, the Chavetz Chaim still hasn't told us what exactly the problem over here is. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Chav Zayin, Mishum demoilid. The words of the Ramah was Mishum demoilid bahen reicha. Because by spraying the fragrance onto the beged, you're infusing it with a reich. What's wrong with that? Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'asar midrabanan. This is an isur derabanan, and now the following words are mainly pulled from a Rashi. She'hamoilid davar chadash. When somebody generates something new, karev hu la'oiseh malacha chadasha. You have a beged that didn't have a wonderful, beautiful, fragrant smell before. Now it does. So it's like a malacha chadasha. It's like you made a new malacha over here. I mean, you did something. You changed the beged. Before it wasn't a fragrant beged. Now it is a fragrant beged. That, in the words of Rashi, is karev loisa malacha chadasha. I don't know precisely what that means, but I saw other Mefarshim who want to learn it. They say it's like a makabah patish. It's like a tikkun moneh. You're definitely making a nice tikkun in the suit. Before the suit smelled bad, now it smells good. Or even if before it had a neutral smell, now it smells very nice. People take cologne, they put on cologne to smell good. So you definitely improved the keli. So that's like a tikkun moneh, and that's awesome. Reicha, you're infusing the beged with a pleasant reyach. For Yom HaDin the aser litain b'Yom Tov davar hameriach l'say hamayim kedei she'yorichu. You're also not allowed to do something to water to infuse it with a nice smell. We're not talking here about a taste. We're talking about a smell. Somehow, I guess if you add like an aromatic oil or something to a water to infuse it with a nice smell, you're not allowed to do that, says the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, now let's go take a look at the biur halacha. In my Mishnah Berurah, it begins on Kuf Chav Ches Amud Beis, Dibur hamaschil ein oisin mugmar. And this is a very famous biur halacha, where the biur halacha discusses the technical halacha of smoking. How does this halacha of ein oisin mugmar, you're not allowed to burn fragrant incense on Yom Tov, how does that affect the burning of tobacco for inhaling, for smoking purposes? Says the Chavetz Chaim, ein oisin mugmar, ule'inyan shtias titun. When it comes to the inhaling of tobacco b'Yom Tov, yesh deis ba'paiskim, there are differences of opinion amongst the paiskim, v'huvu ba'achrayim, and these are brought down by the achrayim. Yesh mehen she'oisrin, there are those who forbid this, Aknes Agdoilov, Amagin Avramis, Tavkov Yodalid, Vakarban Nasanel, Beperik Beis Debeitza, Vachayodam. And why do they answer it? Mishum Dahavaраzu Ein Shava B'chol Nefesh Kamay Mugmar. Because they say that just like Mugmar, the inhaling of tobacco smoke is also not a Davar HaShava L'chol Nefesh. The Gam, the Motzi Boy Kibui, and also there's Kibui that's involved over here. That's not a tzorich of the Eichel Nefesh itself. Kishemadlik al yedei niyar oigacheles, when you light up the tobacco using burning paper or a coal, umashlichim kedarko b'chol, and then they go throw it away. So, in other words, the kibui problem over here is you go ahead and you take a coal and you put it into the tobacco to light the tobacco, and then you discard it. By discarding the coal, you're doing kibui. And that kibui is not a tzarech eichel nefesh at all. So you run into a kibui problem. V'harbe mekilin, on the other hand, the biur halacha brings down, there are those that are achronim that are mekel. Divrei noyam, hamavua beber heitev, v'shulchan atzei shitim, v'harbirka yosef, v'harbishavi chuvin shem yoid. V'ikr tam kulam, and the main reason why they're mekel is mishum dahachshav shaharbe regilin, but they're not shava b'chol nefesh. Chavetz Chaim says already in his time, the smoking was already so widespread that it became something that was considered a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. V'rak shetzarech lizar mikibui. However, even though you could be matir maybe the havara of the mugmar, the burning of the tobacco, maybe you could be matir because you'll say that it's eichel nefesh and it's a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. All right, so somehow you want to go ahead and you want to be matir it, but you still have the kibui problem. You can't be matir the kibui. You should light it from a fire, from a flame. The gam migachelis, you see, when they would light it using a paper, what he's talking about is you have the tobacco, you want to light the tobacco. So you take a paper and you light the paper, and now you shove the paper into the tobacco. Well, by doing that, you're extinguishing the paper. And there's no eichel nefesh purpose in extinguishing the paper. So don't do that. Light it directly from a flame. V'gam migacheles mutter, he says there's also a way that you could do it with a coal. Tahainu lekachas gacheles bayeres, if you use a burning coal, umiyad shehidlek atitun, and immediately after igniting the tobacco, yashlichenu b'chazara ala eish, immediately throw the coal back onto the fire, be'inyan shaloyia kibui klal, so that there was never a chance to have kibui on the coal. V'gam shaloy lechasais b'michseh she'ena menukav. Also, you can't go ahead and then cover the burning tobacco with some kind of a cover that doesn't have holes in it, because that would smother it and do kibui. Also, you can't add fresh tobacco onto the burning tobacco, because when you add the fresh tobacco, you're going to do kibui. You're going to somewhat extinguish the tobacco that was already burning, because you're going to deprive it of oxygen. V'gam b'tzigarin. How about cigarettes? Regilin b'chayil lahasir hanisraf be'etzpa. What do people do when they smoke? They smoke. The tip of the cigarette is burning. Ash piles up. They knock the end with their finger, and they knock the ash off. Well, when they knock it off, there's a little bit that was burning that now falls off and extinguishes. That's kibui. Oilidach by bakir. Or sometimes they knock it against the wall. Or when they finish with it, they throw it down and they step on it. All of that is kibui, that's aser. Yesh lizar b'yamtiv the yesh b'shum kibui. All of these things, even if you're going to be matir the smoking of the cigarette itself, that you'll say it's ochel nefesh and you'll say it's a davar hashav l'chol nefesh, but you can't be matir all of these various different acts of kibui. Oid Kosav b'shari tshuva, the shari tshuva also writes, there are those that are machmir not to smoke on Yom Tov Rishon, because Yom Tov Rishon, according to us, we're B'ki and B'kviyah Diarcha, we have a calendar. We know that the first day of Yom Tov is the Iker. And they're also makbid on both days of Rosh Hashanah, because the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah is the Kedusha Arichta. So they're both an Iker. The second day is also not mitam safek. Or lahakol b'yom tov sheni. And these shitas, they're more makel on the second day of Yom Tov. V'chein nayag el asais. And the Berurah says that was the custom. He brings down the custom, that the custom was to be machmir, not to smoke on Yom Tov Rishon, but to be makel on Yom Tov Sheni, with the exception of both days of Rosh Hashanah, that you machmir both days of Rosh Hashanah. And nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, if somebody is makel and Yom Tov Rishon, you can't protest. You can't be moicha against them. But again, they have to be very careful about the malacha of kiboy, of extinguishing. However, says the Berurah, very important line here. You can only say this heter in a locale where a lot of people smoke, where many people are accustomed to smoking. So then you could possibly call it a davar hashava b'chol nefesh. If not, it's 100% aser. It's not a davar hashava b'chol nefesh. It could be even an issa daraisa. And even in places where everybody is accustomed to smoking, and then there's no problem of havara, because it's havara, it's arich chol nefesh, and it's something that shava b'chol nefesh. But again, he repeats it again, how careful everybody would have to be about the malacha of kibui. The people who smoke, they're so accustomed to throwing down the cigarette butt and stepping on it, and that would be kibui. We know heter for that kibui. Now, I must stress that nowadays, in my mind, it's virtually impossible, and I don't have to say this over in the name of myself. Rav Shlomo Zalman said this, Rav Elyashiv Zechat Levracha said this. Nowadays, it's virtually impossible, especially here, to say that smoking is a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. For heaven's sakes, the law, you're not allowed to smoke indoors. You're not allowed to smoke in a restaurant. You're not allowed to smoke in a bar. You have to be designated smoking areas. There's all sorts of laws against it. And how the world has changed. When I was a kid, and I remember the first time I learned this, when I remember we used to go out and daven Motzei Shabbos, and by the time the Shtil Shemona Esrei was over and everybody said Atakan Antanu, and there were Mavdil in Shemona Esrei, already 80% of the adults had already lit up. And after Ma'ariv was over, everybody stood around for 5 minutes until they finished schmoozing, until they finished their first cigarette, and then they threw the first cigarette on the ground, stepped on it, and then everybody went home. That's how prevalent smoking was. Now, I can't remember the last time I saw somebody light up. So how are you going to call it a davar hashava l'chol nefesh? It's virtually impossible in my mind to call it now a davar hashava l'chol nefesh. Also, smoking b'chlal. Now that we know how dangerous smoking is 100% aser. I'm hesitant to call it mamish aser because you have people who started smoking when they didn't know, or they started smoking and now they're addicted. You want to call them an onus. It's hard to say that every time they light up a cigarette they're doing an iser, but it's zicher aser to begin smoking. There's no heter to start smoking. You know how dangerous it is. There can't be any heter. And it's interesting to note that even the Chavetz Chaim, who lived in the 30s, when there were many who thought that smoking was gar healthy, he writes in his Musar Svarim, he writes that you shouldn't smoke. And he says, why? Apparently the Chavetz Chaim already knew that it wasn't healthy. I know my Rebbe, Berurah Zal Zayin Gesund and Stark, always says, this much is for sure. You can't say that somebody who smokes is a Bal Nefesh. So he says, if somebody smokes, all of those things that in halacha it says Bal Nefesh Yachmer Love, Bal Nefesh Yachmer Love, you're not a Bal Nefesh if you smoke. So I remember Berurah telling somebody once, he said, you're makban on Chol Yisrael, why? You smoke. If you smoke, there's no room to be machmer on Chol Yisrael. The Rishur Zatzal says Bal Nefesh Yachmer. You're not a Bal Nefesh. If you smoke, you can't call yourself a Bal Nefesh. Okay. Everyone should have Ksiva Tova, good geben shiur. I hope everybody is thinking about the Yom HaDin and Slichus and Tshuva and Ma'asim Tovim. What a difficult year it's been, what a difficult year it continues to be. And we really, really have to be mispal. I'll share with you, if I may, two machshavas that I have had over the last few days. Unbeknownst to the shiur, I am presently in quarantine. My house is in a 2-week quarantine, and it looks like I'm going to be quarantined over Rosh Hashanah. I have a positive COVID case in my house, so my whole family is in quarantine. And it really makes you think. And it struck me that a lot of this COVID really broke out by us very soon after the Siyam HaShas. And the Siyam HaShas was a very public celebration. And yes, it was a celebration of HaTorah, it was a celebration of limud HaTorah, but to a certain extent, it was a very public pat ourselves on the back session. And the truth is, it troubled me even then. I personally did not attend the Siyam. I had misgivings about attending the Siyam. I was going to. I actually did buy a ticket. But in the end, I went to my Rebbe's Levaya. I went to the Levaya of Rav Gershon Weiss at Tzadik Levracha. But I had misgivings. Why are we having this public celebration of patting ourselves on the back? Are we that great, Rabbi Isai? I'm not taking away from anybody who learns Daf Yomi. If you learn Daf Yomi, it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. I encourage everyone to do it. And if you're zoichet to be Messiah Shas, you should celebrate that you were zoichet to be Messiah Shas. Celebrate it around your dining room table with your family. Is it something that we should make such a public display and a public celebration of how great we are? Are we that great? Strikes me that what the Rabbeinu Shalom has told us is, it's very nice you got up in front of the whole world and you patted yourself on the back and you said how great you are. Now go home and now sit in your own home and analyze on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis, on a minute-to-minute basis. Are you that great? Do you have plenty of what to improve? And I'm talking to myself, Rabbi Isai. It's very easy. I would say it's very easy. For some people, it's not easy. It's a challenge. But you take out 45 minutes of your day to learn Daf Yomi after a hard day's work. Tavei alecha bracha. But you go and you make such a public spectacle of how great we are. Are we that great? Are we really that great? Or do we have to sit at home and say hour to hour of our day, what do we do with our day? Like the Mesilas Yesharim starts off, do we understand what our chayv is ba'olam? Do we understand what our obligation in this world is and what we're supposed to be living for? And are we fulfilling it? Or are we just very quick to pat ourselves on the back when we do something good and something nice? And maybe that's why, after such a public display, the Rabbeinu Shalom shut down everything that was public. And he put us in the privacy of our homes. Analyze what goes on by you in the privacy of your home. Find out what is there that you have to work on. What is there that you have to improve? That's one thing. The other thing that struck me is when you say slichus, take a look at the slichus. Take a look how the theme of slichus is so much. It's not that we come to the Rabbeinu Shalom constantly in slichus and we're doing tshuva and we're saying, Rabbeinu Shalom, we did a chet and we want to do tshuva on a chet. That's vidui. We have that in vidui. And we have that in some selected lines of the slichusin. But the majority of the slichusin, we're coming to the Rabbeinu Shalom speaking about Klal Yisrael as a whole. And we come to the Rabbeinu Shalom, we say, oy vey, look at how downtrodden Klal Yisrael is. Look, Rabbeinu Shalom, the Klal Yisrael that was the apple of your eye, the Klal Yisrael that was your mamish, your precious gem, is now so downtrodden. Lemishiso, levaizizim. We come to the Rabbeinu Shalom and we say, look how downtrodden Klal Yisrael is. Look how downtrodden Eretz Yisrael is. Come, Rabbeinu Shalom, help us. We need your help. Yeah, but then we live in Gullus and we throw up these gorgeous buildings and we drive around in fancy cars and we throw up these gorgeous houses and we put on a public display like in MetLife Stadium. To be in the eyes of the whole world. Are we acting downtrodden? Do we feel like we're in Gullus? Do we have a sense of urgency? Do we have a feeling, Rabbeinu Shalom, it's before Yom HaDin, we're coming to you and we're telling you we need the Geula? Well, no, we're sitting pretty, everything's fine. We could rent out MetLife Stadium. We could have all the press of the whole world come and look how good we are. We could build moistus, 10 stories, 15 stories, everything else. We could be in the news all over the place, and we need this, and we need that, and we want our rights about this, we want our rights about that. So what do you need to throw for? So the Rebbe Shalom comes along, and the Rebbe Shalom says, don't be comfortable. You're comfortable? I'll make you uncomfortable. There's got to be a sense of urgency, Rabbi say. We're saying slichus, we're asking the Rebbe Shalom, help us. Help us. Look how terrible! Look at the terrible situation that we're in. We need you to bring the geula. But do we really feel that way, or do we feel like we're sitting pretty? So the Rebbe Shalom showed us that we're not sitting pretty. I think these are some of the things that we really need to think about going into the Yom HaDin. Otherwise, there's no reason for the Rebbe Shalom to change them for the better. So I hope that everybody is taking the time, the opportunity to be introspective and think about these things and tackle work on them. We should be zeicha to a shtas geula of Yeshua. It should be tachel shana kiloisah. The year with its curses should be over, and tachel shana uberchesah, and we should go into a new year full of brachas, and everyone should have gesund and parnasa and nachas and everything good. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Be well.